A desperate single mother offers her last meal to a grieving stranger on New Year's Eve, unaware he is a secret millionaire CEO who will change her life forever. "You look sad, mister. Wanna meet my mommy?" The words, spoken by the innocent voice of a child, sliced through the sterile silence of his grief. A tiny, bright spark in a world that had gone dark and cold. Julian Vance froze. The biting cold of the December wind seemed to seep directly into his bones, a physical manifestation of the hollow ache that had been his constant companion for 3 long years. The pounding rain had finally ceased, leaving the city streets glistening under the flickering streetlights, each reflection a shattered memory of happier times. He sat on the park bench, a ghost in an impeccable but now slightly damp cashmere coat, his gaze fixed on nothing, seeing only the ghosts of a wife's smile and a son's laughter, stolen from him on a night just like this one. He didn't know it yet, but this small voice was a tremor before a seismic shift in his universe. A little girl with eyes as wide and sincere as a clear summer sky stood before him, her small hand pointing to a woman who stood a few feet away, her expression a mixture of gentle mortification and profound kindness. The woman, Alara, had a face that looked both fragile and resilient, her features worn with a weariness that went far beyond physical exhaustion. She clutched a paper bag to her chest, a shield against the world's indifference. Her heart thudded wildly against her ribs. She had told her daughter, Lily, 100 times not to talk to strangers. Yet here she was, her 4-year-old angel approaching the saddest-looking man she had ever seen. The man was dressed in clothes that whispered of immense wealth, a stark contrast to their own threadbare coats. Yet his eyes were utterly haunted, possessing a hollowness that mirrored the desperate emptiness in her own soul. He looked like a king who had lost his entire kingdom. He was lost. Lily took another small step forward, her tiny hand still outstretched. "My mommy makes everything better. She gives the best hugs." Alara's breath caught in her throat, a mixture of pride and fear. This was her Lily, pure and selfless, seeing only the hurt in a stranger's eyes and wanting to fix it. A quiet resolve settled over Alara, pushing past her hesitation. She walked forward, her worn boots making no sound on the wet pavement, and knelt beside her daughter. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper against the city's low hum. "I'm so sorry to bother you, sir." She has a very big heart. Julian's gaze shifted from the child to the mother, and for the first time in years, he truly saw someone. He saw the faint lines of worry etched around her gentle eyes, the paleness of her skin from the cold, and the unwavering dignity in her posture despite the obvious signs of hardship. Her sincerity was a balm on a raw, open wound. It was undeniable. He finally found his voice, a rough and used sound. "It's no bother," Alara nodded, pulling a small, foil-wrapped package from the paper bag she held so tightly. The aroma of hot noodles and savory broth filled the cold air, a scent so simple and yet so deeply comforting. It was her and Lily's New Year's Eve dinner, the last of her money spent on a small comfort to mark a day that for others was about celebration, but for them was just about survival. The narration of her own life was one of quiet desperation. She saw the man's profound sadness, a grief so palpable it felt like a physical presence between them, and her own hunger suddenly seemed insignificant. This was the moment, the non-negotiable catalyst. Her own suffering was immense, but her goodness was greater. Without another thought, she pushed the warm package into his hands. "Here," she said, her voice steady. "You look like you need this more than we do." Julian stared at the offering, his mind struggling to process the act. This woman, who clearly had so little, was giving him her food, her warmth, her comfort, with no expectation of reward. In his world, every interaction was a transaction, every kindness a calculated investment. This was different. This was pure. The warmth of the container seeped into his frozen hands, a physical sensation that felt almost sacred. It was a warmth that reached past his skin, touching the ice that had encased his heart for 3 agonizing years. Awe, raw and overwhelming, washed over him. His throat tightened. I can't take your dinner." Alara gave him a small, sad smile, a glimmer of light in her weary eyes. "It's okay. We'll be fine. Sometimes a warm meal is the best medicine." She squeezed Lily's hand, ready to leave, to vanish back into the anonymity of the city. He had to do something, say something. He fumbled in his pocket for his wallet, thick with crisp bills that meant nothing. "Please, let me pay you." Her expression didn't falter, but a quiet dignity settled over her features, a gentle but firm wall. "That's not necessary. Happy New Year." She turned and walked away, her small daughter trotting beside her, leaving him sitting on the bench with her selfless gift in his hands. He watched them disappear into the heavy fog that was rolling in off the river, a mother and child swallowed by the night. He was alone again, but something inside him had fundamentally splintered. The silence that returned was different now, filled not with the echoes of his loss, but with the resonance of her quiet strength. He clutched the warm container like a lifeline. He was saved. He opened the foil, and the simple meal inside was more exquisite than any five-star cuisine he had ever tasted. With the food was a small, folded napkin, and tucked inside was a child's drawing of a smiling sun, rendered in bright yellow crayon. At the bottom, in shaky block letters, was the name Lily. That was his only clue. He ate the meal slowly, each bite a sacrament, a communion with a kindness so profound it felt like a miracle. When he was finished, he carefully folded the foil and placed the child's drawing into the inner pocket of his coat, right over his heart. It felt heavier and more valuable than any stock portfolio or corporate deed. A renewed purpose began to smolder in the ashes of his grief. He would find her. He would find this woman, Elara, and her daughter, Lily, and he would repay this singular act of pure humanity. It was no longer a choice. It was a sacred duty. He stood up, his posture no longer slumped with despair but straightened with resolve. He looked out into the vast, indifferent city, but it no longer felt like a prison of his memories. It was now a map, and he had his first clue. He pulled out his sleek, polished phone and made a call. "Harris?" he said, his voice now commanding and clear, stripped of its earlier fragility. "I have a job for you. It's the most important one you'll ever do for me." Total silence. The next few days were a blur of quiet, dignified desperation for Elara. The biting cold of her small apartment seemed to mock the memory of her brief, warm act of charity. The single radiator clanked and hissed, offering little more than noise against the relentless chill that seeped through the window frames. Her landlord, a man with a perpetually sour expression, had slipped a stark white eviction notice under her door, the red letters a screaming testament to her failure. She had been unjustly fired from her job as a receptionist a month prior, falsely accused of stealing petty cash by a manager looking for a scapegoat. Her late husband, a good and gentle man, had left her with nothing but cherished memories and a mountain of medical debt. Now her savings were gone. Her hope was a flickering light, threatening to be extinguished by the harsh winds of reality. She sat at her small, Rick-known table, staring at the offending piece of paper, her chest tightening with a familiar, unbearable anxiety. Lily was playing on the worn rug with her only doll, her innocent chatter a stark contrast to the sterile silence of her mother's fear. Elara traced the rim of her cold teacup, her knuckles white. She had given away her last hot meal, and now she wondered if that single act of compassion had been a foolish, reckless mistake. She felt shattered, but then she would remember the profound, haunted sadness in the stranger's eyes, and she knew, deep in her soul, that she would do it again. That single, selfless connection had reminded her that there was still goodness in the world, even if she couldn't see it in her own life at that moment. She had to believe that. She had to. Meanwhile, Julian Vance, a man who could move markets with a single phone call, was moving heaven and earth for a different reason. His trusted head of security, Harris, a man of immense discretion and resources, had taken the small clue, a child's drawing, and worked a quiet miracle. Using advanced facial recognition software from CCTV footage in the area and cross-referencing public records, he had found her. Elara Jensen, a recent widow, unemployed, living in a rundown building on the verge of eviction. The file landed on Julian's ornate, polished marble desk in his cavernous office overlooking the city. Every detail of her hardship was a fresh stab to his heart, a testament to the injustice of a world that would let such a pure soul suffer so deeply. His emotional journey had shifted from awe to a fierce, protective determination. He would not simply repay her. He would become her guardian angel, her hidden savior. He began the first of his secret interventions. A wire transfer, routed through 3 different charitable fronts to be untraceable, paid Alara's rent for the next 6 months. The next morning, Alara found a crisp, official-looking receipt from her landlord in her mailbox with the words, "Paid in full," stamped across it in bold, black ink. She stared at it, her mind reeling in disbelief. She thought it was a mistake, a clerical error, a cruel joke. She called the landlord, her voice trembling, and he confirmed it in a gruff, confused tone. An anonymous benefactor, he'd said. A church, maybe. She hung up the phone, her hand pressed to her mouth as tears of shock and relief streamed down her pale cheeks. It felt like a prayer answered by a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. A miracle. But Julian was just getting started. He learned from Harris's report that Alara had a degree in art history but had been unable to find work in her field. She dreamed of being a curator, of surrounding herself with the beauty and history that she loved. His corporation, Vanstech, had recently acquired a portfolio of diverse companies as part of a philanthropic expansion, and one of them was the prestigious Blackwood Gallery, a place known for its impeccable collection and stately exhibitions. He made another call. He didn't pull strings. He rewove the entire tapestry. He instructed the gallery's director to create a new assistant curator position, tailoring the requirements to perfectly match Alara's resume, which Harris had discreetly procured. An email was sent to Alara from the gallery's HR department, inviting her for an interview. It was an opportunity so far beyond her wildest dreams that she was certain it was another mistake. But her quiet resolve pushed her to respond, to take this one impossible chance. She spent 2 days preparing, researching the gallery's history, pulling her one good but slightly worn blouse from the back of her closet, and practicing her answers in the mirror until her reflection looked less like a desperate woman and more like a hopeful professional. She felt a spark of her old self returning. The woman she was before grief and poverty had worn her down. On the day of the interview, a mysterious delivery arrived at her door. A box containing a new, impeccably tailored suit, a pair of elegant shoes, and a simple leather portfolio. There was no card, only a small, typed note. It read, "For the new beginning you deserve." The fabric was smooth and crisp under her fingers, a world away from her threadbare existence. She gasped. The kindness was so overwhelming, so anonymous. It felt like a dream. She didn't know it, but her hidden savior was watching from afar, ensuring that when she walked into that gallery, she would look and feel as powerful and worthy as he knew she was. He had orchestrated everything. His purpose was clear. Alara walked into the Blackwood Gallery, the soft hush of the space, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of her life. The air smelled of polished wood and old canvas, a scent that felt like coming home. The sterile silence of the grand halls was calming, filled with the unspoken stories of the art that lined the walls. She was met by the gallery director, a stern but fair-looking woman named Ms. Dubois, whose eyes widened slightly at Alara's impeccable appearance. The interview was rigorous, a deep dive into art history, curation theory, and exhibition logistics. Alara, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and genuine passion, answered every question with a quiet, dignified intelligence that impressed Ms. Dubois. She spoke of art not as a commodity, but as a lifeline to human experience, a way of finding beauty in a broken world. Her sincerity was palpable. As the interview concluded, Ms. Dubois smiled for the first time. "You are an exceptional candidate, Ms. Jensen. Your passion is undeniable. There is just one more person you need to meet. The new owner of the gallery is here today and wishes to have a final say in this appointment." Alara's heart pounded. The owner. This was it. The door to the office opened with a soft click, and a man walked in. He was tall, dressed in a crisp, dark suit that fit him perfectly. His presence was commanding, filling the room with a quiet power. Alara looked up, and her breath caught in her throat. Her world tilted on its axis. It was him, the sad man from the park bench. Julian Vance stood before her, no longer a haunted ghost but a man of immense, tangible authority. His eyes, however, held the same depth, but now they were not hollow with grief, but glistening with a tender, unspoken emotion. He looked at her with an intensity that made her feel as though she were the only person in the room, in the world. He was seeing her. He froze for a split second, a flicker of raw memory crossing his features, before his expression smoothed into one of calm professionalism, though his eyes told a different story. "Ms. Jensen," he said, his voice a low, resonant timbre that vibrated through her. "It's a pleasure to see you again." Total disbelief. The reconnection was a fragile, unspoken thing, shimmering in the air between them. Alara could barely form a coherent sentence. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and dawning realization. The anonymous rent payment, the perfectly timed job interview, the suit. It was all him. This powerful, commanding man was the stranger she had offered her leftovers to, a gesture that now seemed impossibly small and foolish in the face of his obvious wealth. "You," she faltered, her voice a mere whisper. "It was you." Julian gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his steady gaze never leaving hers. Ms. Dubois looked between them, sensing a history she could not comprehend, and with a discreet cough, excused herself, leaving them alone in the ornate office. The silence deepened, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. It was Julian who broke it, his voice gentle. "I believe I owe you my thanks." And an apology for the deception. Alara shook her head, sinking into one of the plush leather chairs opposite his desk. "I don't understand. Why?" This was the moment for the confession, the forging of a bond over shared tragedy. The stately office, with its amber hue from the desk lamp, became their sanctuary. Julian sat down, not behind the imposing desk, but in the chair beside hers, closing the distance between them. He leaned forward, his impeccable facade cracking just enough to reveal the raw grief beneath. That night, New Year's Eve, it was the 3rd anniversary, he began, his voice thick with an emotion he had suppressed for years. "Of the accident that took my wife, Sarah, and my son." Leo, a sob caught in his throat, but he pushed on, needing her to understand. "I was sitting on that bench because it was the last place I saw them. We were on our way to see the fireworks. I was supposed to be in the car with them." The confession hung in the air, heavy and heartbreaking. He had been living in a sterile silence of his own making, a punishment for surviving. Alara listened with unwavering attention, her own grief rising to meet his. She saw past the millionaire CEO, past the hidden savior, and saw a man shattered by loss, just as she was. She didn't offer platitudes or empty words of comfort. Instead, her empathy was a quiet, profound presence. When he finished, she simply reached out and placed her hand gently on his arm, a small gesture of immense solidarity. The warmth of her touch seemed to anchor him. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, and the words were not a formality, but a sincere acknowledgement of his pain. Now it was her turn. A sense of trust, forged in that strange, cold night and solidified in this warm, quiet room, compelled her to share her own tragedy. "My husband, David, it was a heart condition we didn't know about," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "One day he was here, making Lily laugh with his terrible singing, and the next, he was gone. The doctors said it was quick, painless, but the debt he left behind, that has been a slow, painful thing." She shared the story of her struggle, the lost job, the fear, the loneliness. She confessed her own desperation on that New Year's Eve, how giving him her meal was an act of defiance against the despair that threatened to swallow her whole. They were two souls adrift in the same ocean of grief, who had found each other like a message in a bottle. A tender, unspoken bond formed between them, woven from the threads of shared loss and mutual understanding. He had seen her virtue, and now she had seen his vulnerability. He had been saved not by her food, but by her seeing him. He had been seen. When she finished her story, Julian's eyes were glistening with unshed tears. He saw not a charity case, but a woman of immense inner strength, a warrior who had faced down her own darkness with selfless grace. "You and Lily," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "You reminded me what it felt for the sun to shine again." He offered her the job of assistant curator on the spot, not as charity, but because he had heard her passion and knew she was perfect for it. It was a lifeline, a chance to rebuild, to hope again. The scene ended not with a dramatic flourish, but with a quiet, shared moment of profound connection. He stood up and walked to a small kitchenette in the corner of the office. He returned with a cup of hot tea, placing the warm ceramic into her hands. A simple gesture, promise of care. She accepted. Life began to change for Alara, slowly at first, then with a gathering momentum that felt like waking from a long, terrible dream. The job at the Blackwood Gallery was more than a salary. It was a restoration of her spirit. She moved through the quiet, stately halls, her mind engaged, her heart healing amidst the beauty of centuries. She and Lily moved out of the threadbare apartment and into a modest but clean and bright one in a safe neighborhood. A move Julian had insisted on facilitating through the gallery's employee relocation program. He was always there, a steady, supportive presence in the background of her new life. He would find reasons to visit the gallery, to discuss an upcoming exhibition or review acquisition proposals, but they both knew the real reason. Their conversations would stray from art to life, to memories of their loved ones, to dreams for the future. A gentle, tender friendship blossomed, rooted in the fertile ground of their shared grief. He was wonderful with Lily, treating her not as an accessory but as a bright, funny little person in her own right. He would bring her small, thoughtful gifts, a special set of crayons, a book about dragons, and listen with rapt attention to her rambling stories. He was slowly, carefully, rebuilding his own capacity for love by practicing on this small, innocent child. He never overstepped. He was always the kind, quiet Mr. Vance. But Alara saw the way his eyes would soften when Lily laughed, the way a genuine, unburdened smile would touch his lips. He was coming back to life. The hollow look was slowly being replaced by a golden glow of hope. He was healing. The culmination of her new life was an invitation to the gallery's annual New Year's Eve Gala. It was a major event in the city's art and social scene, a world away from the cold park bench where she had spent her last holiday. Julian had personally ensured she received an invitation, and when she tried to politely decline, feeling out of place, he had appeared at her door with a small, elegant box. Inside was a breathtaking evening gown of deep sapphire blue, a fabric that shimmered like a midnight sky. "Please," he had said, his voice soft. "I want to see you shine," so she went. Walking into the gleaming ballroom of the hotel where the gala was held felt surreal. The air was filled with the sound of a string quartet, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the low hum of polite conversation. Ornate chandeliers cast an amber hue over the crowd of impeccably dressed guests. Alara, in her beautiful gown, felt a surge of confidence. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a widow or a struggling single mother. She felt like herself. Julian was waiting for her, looking impossibly handsome in a classic tuxedo. He took her arm, his touch sending a warm jolt through her. "You look beautiful, Alara," he whispered, his eyes full of an admiration that was both respectful and deeply romantic. They spent the evening together, a quiet island in the midst of the swirling party. He introduced her to influential artists and patrons, not as his employee, but as his esteemed colleague and friend, speaking of her insights with genuine pride. She felt seen. She felt valued. But the fragile peace of the evening was about to be shattered. This was the moment the antagonist, the foil, was designed for. A sharp, cruel voice cut through the civilized murmur of the crowd. "Well, well, if it isn't the little gold digger herself." Alara froze. Her blood ran cold. She knew that voice. She turned to see her former mother-in-law, Beatrice Albright, standing there, her face a mask of smug contempt. Beatrice was a woman of inherited wealth and monumental cruelty, who had always despised Alara for being, in her eyes, beneath her son. She blamed Alara for David's death, for everything. The public humiliation began. "I should have known you'd find another rich man to leech off of," Beatrice sneered, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of the surrounding guests. A circle of curious onlookers began to form. "First my son, who you drove to an early grave with your constant demands. And now, who is this?" Her venomous gaze swept over Julian. Alara stood, dignified but visibly trembling, the color draining from her face. She felt the familiar shame and helplessness wash over her, the weight of Beatrice's baseless accusations pressing down on her. "Beatrice, please," Alara whispered, her voice cracking. "Not here," this only emboldened the older woman. "Oh yes, here. I want everyone to see you for what you are. A pathetic, social-climbing parasite who was fired for being a common thief. Did you tell your new benefactor that?" The words were like stones, each one a painful blow. The crowd murmured, their gazes a mixture of pity and judgment. Alara felt her carefully rebuilt world splintering around her. She was overwhelmed. But then, a calm, commanding presence stepped in front of her, shielding her. Julian's demeanor was perfectly composed, but his eyes held a cold, dangerous fire. He made his dramatic entrance. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the room with the sharp authority of a judge's gavel. "That is quite enough." The salvation scene unfolded with breathtaking speed. Julian turned his full attention to Beatrice Albright, his calm power a stark contrast to her shrill hysterics. The power dynamic in the room was about to be completely reversed. "For your information, madam," he began, his voice dangerously quiet, "my name is Julian Vance, and I am not just Alara's new benefactor. I am the owner of the Blackwood Gallery, the host of this event, and, as it happens, the man whose life she saved with an act of selfless kindness you couldn't possibly comprehend." A collective gasp echoed through the crowd. Beatrice's smug expression faltered, replaced by disbelief. Julian's monologue of salvation was just beginning. "Furthermore," he continued, his voice rising with controlled fury, "I personally investigated the circumstances of Ms. Jensen's dismissal from her previous job. I discovered she was framed by a manager who was later fired for embezzlement. The only thief in that situation was the one who accused her." He took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "And to speak of her as a leech on your son. I've seen the mountain of medical debt your family refused to help with after his passing. Debt that Alara has been working honorably to pay while raising her daughter alone. She is the most virtuous, dignified, and resilient person I have ever had the privilege to know." He turned his back on the now speechless Beatrice and faced the stunned audience. "Ms. Jensen is the gallery's new head curator, a position she earned through sheer talent and brilliance." He then looked directly at Alara, his expression softening into one of profound, undeniable love. His grand revelation was complete. He offered his hand to her. "Alara," he said, his voice now gentle and for her alone, "you will never have to face this kind of cruelty again. I promise you." Security guards, summoned by a discreet signal from Harris who stood nearby, moved swiftly and silently toward Beatrice Albright. They flanked her, their presence a clear, non-negotiable directive. "Ma'am," one of them said in a low, firm tone, "you need to leave." Now Beatrice, her face pale with shock and utter humiliation, was escorted from the ballroom. She was speechless. The resolution was swift and cathartic. As the disgraced Beatrice vanished from sight, the room erupted in soft, supportive applause. The cloud of humiliation had dissipated, replaced by a wave of respect for Alara and for the powerful man who had so thoroughly defended her honor. But Julian only had eyes for her. He led her away from the crowd, through a set of glass doors and onto a quiet, private balcony overlooking the city. The cold night air was a welcome shock to her senses. Snow had begun to fall, thick, silent flakes drifting down and blanketing the world in a soft white hush. They stood in the silence for a moment, the city lights twinkling below them like a carpet of fallen stars. Alara was still trembling, not from cold or fear anymore, but from the sheer, overwhelming force of what had just happened. Julian, you didn't have to. He turned to her, his hands gently taking hers. His touch was warm and steady. Yes, I did, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Alara, from the moment I saw you on that park bench, you have been a light in my darkness. You gave me hope when I had none. You taught me how to feel again. Your kindness, your strength, your spirit, they are extraordinary. He looked deep into her glistening eyes, his own full of a raw, tender vulnerability. This was it, the romantic fulfillment. I think I have been falling in love with you since the moment your daughter asked if I wanted to meet her mommy. A tear slipped down Alara's cheek, a tear of joy, of relief, of a hope so profound it was almost painful. Julian. He gently brushed the tear away with his thumb. Let me take care of you and Lily, not as a benefactor but as a partner, as a family. Let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the kindness you showed a stranger on a cold winter night. Just as he finished speaking, the distant sound of bells and cheering began to swell from the city below. The clock was striking midnight. It was New Year's Day. He leaned in and kissed her. A kiss that was not about passion, but about promise. It was a kiss of profound gratitude, of shared healing, and of a new beginning. It was a promise of security and love. It was everything. She kissed him back. She was home. 1 year later, the stately mansion that had once been a cavernous tomb of Julian's grief was now a home, filled with light, laughter, and the delicious scent of roasting chicken. A magnificent Christmas tree, decorated with a chaotic but joyful mix of ornate glass baubles and Lily's handmade paper ornaments, stood in the corner of the high-ceiling living room. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a golden glow over the scene. Julian sat on the plush rug, a look of pure, unadulterated joy on his face, as he helped a 5-year-old Lily put the finishing touches on a massive gingerbread house. Alara watched them from the doorway, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. She was no longer the haunted, weary woman from the park bench. Her eyes shone with happiness and peace. She wore a simple, comfortable sweater, and in her hand, she held a steaming mug of tea. She was the head curator at the Blackwood, a respected and brilliant figure in the art world. But her greatest masterpiece was the life they had built together. This was their happily ever after. Lily, with a serious expression, carefully placed a gumdrop on the roof of the gingerbread house. It's perfect, Daddy Julian, she announced with satisfaction. The name had been her idea, and every time she said it, it sent a jolt of pure, cathartic joy through Julian's soul. He was a father again, a husband, a man healed. He chuckled, a deep, easy sound that filled the room. It is perfect, sweetheart. Just like you. He looked up and met Alara's gaze across the room. The love that passed between them was a silent, powerful current, a testament to their journey from the depths of despair to this perfect, idyllic moment of peace. He had kept his promise. He had built a fortress of love and security around her and Lily, a world where the cruelty of a Beatrice Albright could never touch them again. The old, painful memories of New Year's Eve had been replaced by new, beautiful ones. It was no longer a day of mourning, but a celebration of their beginning. Later that evening, after Lily was tucked into bed, her dreams full of sugar plums and dragons, Julian and Alara stood on the balcony, watching the gentle snow fall. He wrapped a warm blanket around her shoulders and pulled her close. "Happy New Year, my love," he whispered into her hair. She leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. "Happy New Year," she replied, her voice soft. In his coat pocket, he still kept a small, folded piece of paper, a child's drawing of a smiling sun, a sacred receipt for a debt of kindness that had been repaid 1,000 times over, a reminder of the miracle that had saved them both. They had found their forever. This story is a fable, a timeless reminder that an act of pure, selfless kindness can be a powerful force for change in a world that often feels transactional and cold. It shows us that even in our darkest moments of hardship and despair, the choice to extend compassion to another suffering soul can create ripples we can never predict. A woman on the brink of losing everything gave her last meal to a man who had everything but had lost his reason to live. That simple, profound connection didn't just save them from their immediate circumstances. It saved them from the prisons of their own grief and loneliness, creating a new life, a new family, built on a foundation of genuine human decency. It teaches us that true wealth isn't found in polished marble or crisp banknotes, but in the unwavering strength of a virtuous heart and the courage to see and soothe the pain in others. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the quiet power of goodness, we hope you'll carry its message with you. Perhaps it will inspire you to look for the sadness in a stranger's eyes, to offer a small comfort without expectation, or to simply believe that your own acts of kindness, no matter how small they seem, might just be the miracle someone else is praying for. True love and redemption often begin with the simplest of gestures. For more soul-stirring tales of love, hope, and the incredible strength of the human spirit, please like this story, share it with someone who needs a little inspiration, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. We believe in the power of stories to